Okay. So good morning, everyone. And we'll start with some prayers to set our mind in a good state, and then do a little bit of meditation on a topic from last week to help us have a really good motivation for being here, participating in this class.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one that's gone, for destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one gone to bliss, no over the world, supreme guide of beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods and humans, to you, the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow, with pure bodies formed supremely fine, wisdom motion like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner the best, supreme guide to you I bow, with the supreme signs, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not incomparable, wise one, to you I bow. Great, compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to this Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freedom of self, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, mirage, a flame, a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble, a dream, a flash, a lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeings through the four faults, and be delivered from the ocean of psychic existence perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, 4 lands, sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your true body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam guram namandalakam niryatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
So do your best to be settled in the here and now. Be in a comfortable position and let your mind be free of thoughts of other things from the past or the future or other places. Put those aside for now and make the determination that you'll do the best you can to keep your mind focused on this class and what we're doing here. And have an altruistic motivation. If you already generated such a motivation earlier today, you can recall that, refresh that. And if you haven't yet done that, then you can just use your own thoughts, your own words to feel the wish to benefit others and the wish that this class and you participating in this class will be as beneficial to others as possible, to all other beings, and if possible include the attainment of awakening, which is like the ultimate purpose of our following the spiritual path in the Mahayana tradition. And then let's spend a little bit of time reflecting on something from last week's class. We went through the 4 opponent powers for purifying negative karma, negative actions done in this life and past lives. So spend a few minutes contemplating those 4. The way they were explained here is remorse or regret for the negative actions we've done, and then applying some antidote, doing something positive or counteract the negative energy, and then making a determination or resolution to refrain from doing those actions again in the future, and reliance, generating bodhicitta and taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So those are sometimes explained in different orders, and we may practice them in different orders, but those are the 4 powers for purifying negative karma. So just review those. You're probably quite familiar with them, but think about them. And in particular, see if one or more of those 4 powers is really important for you, is something you find particularly beneficial in the way that you work with your life, with your karma. And then see if you can come to a conclusion going forward to continue using these four powers on a regular basis, every day if possible, particularly when you do notice something negative that you have done or said or even thought. Okay, so the next section in the text on page 147 is under the heading, The Manner of Purification. This talks about how it works. How does purification work? So I think this is something everybody wonders about. You know, when we do these purification practices, what actually happens to that karma that we're trying to purify? And for example, the 35 Buddha practice that is done here every day, and many people around the world do it. There are words that we recite or contemplate that say, feel that all destructive karma and obscurations have been completely purified, and that your mind has become inseparable from the Buddha's pure mind of wisdom and compassion. And there are similar words at the conclusion of the Vajrasattva practice. Probably most purification practices have words like that. And last week there was an email from a woman who practices with Kathy's group every day, and they do the 35 Buddha practice every morning. And she wondered if when you do that practice each morning, are you only purifying the negativities that you accumulated in the previous 24 hours? Since yesterday you already purified all the karma you've created from beginningless time. Right? That's what it says in the right? So what do you think about that? When you say those words at the end of the 35 Buddha practice, do you take them literally? Do you really think, oh, all the karma I've ever created from beginningless time is totally gone, totally purified. I'm completely free. And then the next time you do the practice, you only have to purify whatever karma you may have created, you know, in between. No, I see people shaking their heads. So why does it say that? Why does it say those words if they're not meant to be taken literally? Any ideas? Venerable Jigme?
Well, I think it's like many things in our practice. We say things so that we start building the energy and the strength and the awareness and the knowledge to actually reach that. And so I think it sets our mind going in that direction, that it is possible, even if it's not possible today for me.
Yeah, that's my understanding, that we do have the potential to become completely purified to become completely free of all negative karma and obscurations, afflictions, all that negative stuff. It's possible to become completely free of that. But I think for many of us, it's difficult to believe. Right? We tend to identify more with our negative energy and our faults and so on, and tend to think those are permanent and I'll never be free from them. And it's harder to identify with the positive aspects of ourself, and believe that we can change and we can become like the Buddha. So I think, these kind of words and contemplations and visualizations are to help us counteract that tendency and feel positive, feel confident that yes, I can do it. One day there will come a time, one day in the future, when I will be completely purified and my mind will be just like that of the Buddha. Jenny?
I tend to take those kinds of things, because we have many examples in our practices, as an aspiration. So if I keep saying it over and over and over, and also sometimes I can really connect with, maybe some little bit of every single one might be touched. I don't know, some little crumb of all of them in some way.
Yeah.
But the aspiration part helps.
It
helps make it bigger than the one item that I brought to mind.
Yeah. No, Venerable Pema had her hand up.
For me, those statements help me to understand that with the emptiness, direct realization of emptiness, it will be totally purified. And with each ground of the 10 grounds, something is completely purified. So if somebody is a bodhisattva on that ground, saying that is totally true.
Yeah, I think it does have something to do with emptiness. And if you do have some understanding of emptiness of a permanent, fixed, concrete, real I who is bad, who has all these negativities and has done all these bad things. So, that needs to be dissolved, let go of. And there's no such thing. So the I, as well as all the things that we've done, our negative actions, our afflictions, and so on, all those things are empty. It doesn't mean they don't exist, but they just don't exist the way we normally see them, as real and solid and concrete. And in fact, it's said that that's really the best antidote, the best remedy to purify, is meditating on emptiness, whatever understanding you have. Venerable Sangye.
The way I use this after it's been some years to be able to do this practice is that I can see that the behavior and the afflictions that drive them, I can turn them more quickly. Sometimes when I come out of that practice, my mind feels a little bit more settled and resolved, and so there's more space to think about something a little bit more virtuous. And I'd like to think that when things happen to me that I consider to be small sufferings, that they're small sufferings because I have purified them at a level that this is evidence for me that the purification does work.
Yeah, that's something mentioned in this next section of the text. Problems that we experience while we're practicing Dharma can be our negative karma that's ripening and getting finished in a much lighter way than otherwise. So let's look at what Lama Tsongkhapa says here. The manner in which bad actions can be purified is as follows. the causes for the arising of great suffering in the lower rebirths are transformed into causes for the arising of minor suffering. Okay, so if we have the karma to be born as an animal or a hungry ghost or in hell, and experience a lot of suffering in that situation, so doing purification can change that karma so that it becomes maybe some unpleasant experience we have in this lifetime, like a headache, or getting the flu, or getting COVID, or whatever, or falling down, getting stung by wasps, all these kind of things that can happen to us. Yeah. Or if one is reborn in the lower realms, one does not experience their sufferings. So that's another thing that can happen. You might still take a lower rebirth, but while you're there, you don't have much suffering. Maybe you have a very easy, pleasant life, like our kitties here. They don't have too much suffering, maybe a little bit, but. Or, having been purified, they result in a mere headache in one's present life. So the amount of suffering that would occur is greatly reduced, weakened, so we have a relatively lesser amount of it. Likewise, something that would need to be experienced for a long time is transformed into something of short duration, or that does not need to be experienced at all. Okay, so the length of time of the suffering can be reduced and even become non-existent. There is no categorical certainty here, because it also depends on whether the power of the person doing the purification is great or small, and on whether the four opponent powers are complete or incomplete, intense or not intense, of long or short duration, and so on. So there's no certainty about what is going to happen to your karma when you do purification, because it depends on all these different factors, how sincere you are, how well you do the practice, how long you do the practice, and so on. So generally, doing one session of purification practice isn't enough to purify all that karma and never have to experience any more results. We do need to keep doing it again and again. That's why here it's done, the 35 Buddha practice is done twice a day. And then sometimes during winter retreat, certain people may focus on the Vajrasattva practice, where you do that practice several times a day for several months. So once isn't enough. And then it says, the statement in the sutras and the Vinaya that actions will never be lost, even in 100 eons, implies if the antidotes of the four powers are not cultivated. So I guess in certain scriptures there are statements like that, when we, in fact, in this book, when they talk about the four general characteristics of karma, one of those characteristics is that the karma is never lost. So even when this life ends, our mind goes to the next life, it carries with it all the karmic seeds. They keep going with the mind, life after life after life after life, even for millions of lives, millions of eons, and then sometime in the future, the result will come. So that's the meaning of that. But that is only the case if we don't do purification. Okay, so karma isn't fate. It's always possible to purify, to change karma. Also, Commentary on the Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 lines, that's a text by Haribhadra, says that if purified in accordance with the explanations, even karma certain to be experienced is purified through the antidote of the four powers. So, for example, the five, sometimes they're called five heinous crimes, but a more, I think, precise translation is five actions of immediate retribution. So those are killing your mother, killing your father, killing an arhat, wounding a Buddha with, in a harmful way, and causing a schism in the Sangha. So it said that if you do any of those, are like the worst negative actions you could do, and if you do any of those, and if you don't purify them, the result is that after this life ends, you immediately go to hell. And that's why they're called immediate retribution. But even those can be purified if you apply the four imponent powers. So again, it's not like absolutely definite that you're going to experience that terrible result. Blaze of Reasoning, that's Bhava Viveka's text, says that once you have thus weakened the potential to bring forth a fully ripened effect by means of confession and the resolve to exercise restraint and the like, the fully ripened effect will not come about even if other conditions are met. Conversely, so the fully ripened effect, that's the rebirth that you take as a result of that action. So if we confess and apply the antidotes, then we won't have to have that experience of an unfortunate rebirth, which is really good news because, once we're born in one of the unfortunate realms, then you have very little opportunity to practice. Because of suffering, because of confusion, lack of intelligence, then you're not able to really practice and improve yourself and progress on the path. So it's really important to avoid that. And it says, conversely, wrong views and anger can similarly overpower the roots of virtue. So up to there, he was talking about negative karma that we create and how that can be counteracted by the four opponent powers. But on the positive side, when it comes to our virtuous karma, which we don't want to destroy, right? We do want to experience the results of that. However, virtuous karma can be destroyed or damaged by having anger, getting angry, especially angry at a bodhisattva, holy being, your teacher, and so on, and wrong views, especially the view that there's no such thing as karma, completely rejecting the notion of karma. So those are said to be the things we want to avoid, because otherwise they can destroy our good karma and we won't be able to experience the results of that. Although through confession and the resolve to exercise restraint, you may be able to purify karma so that none at all remains, there is still a big difference between the purity of not being tainted by faults from the beginning and the purity after confession. So, people might, after learning the previous material, they may think, oh, well, then it's okay. It's okay to do some negative action because I can always purify it with the four opponent powers. So, just go ahead and create all this bad karma and then do purification. So he's speaking to that notion. That's not a healthy thought to have. For example, Bodhisattva Levels says that if a root downfall has occurred, that's probably talking about, Bodhisattva root downfall. It can be restored by taking the Bodhisattva vow again, but it will be impossible to reach the first ground in this life. So you can, like if you take the Bodhisattva vows and then if you break one of the root vows, root downfalls, you can purify that by retaking the bodhisattva vow, renewing your commitment to following the bodhisattva vows. But there's some damage done. So even if you're close to attaining the first ground, which is when you gain the direct realization of emptiness and become an Arya Bodhisattva, you delay that. You won't be able to reach that in this life. Also, the Gathering All the Threads Sutra says that once the bad action of abandoning the Dharma, which is explained in that sutra, has occurred, if one confesses it 3 times every day for 7 years, the bad action will be purified. But still, it will take 10 eons, even at the quickest, to attain the level of forbearance on the path of preparation. Okay, so yes, you can purify negative actions, but your progress on the path will be delayed. And that's not good. We talked about this last time, the forbearance level of the path of preparation, that's the point at which you will never again take rebirth in an unfortunate realm by choice, unless by choice. So up until that point on the Bodhisattva's path, the Bodhisattva still has the possibility of taking an unfortunate rebirth. So yeah, it's important to try to get to that point, to get to that level of the path as quickly as possible. So delaying that for, how long does it say? 10 eons. Yeah. Therefore, purification without remainder, that expression, I guess it appears in sutras, scriptures, means that the production of unpleasant effects is purified without remainder. However, since the arising of realizations of the path and so forth will be much delayed, you should try not to be tainted from the beginning. Okay, so it is possible to purify negative karma such that you won't have to experience any bad results, like unfortunate rebirths, but your progress on the path, your attainment of realizations will be delayed. And so from that point of view, it's better to try to avoid creating that negative karma in the first place. Yeah. Did I read that already? However, since the arising of realizations of the path and so forth will be much delayed, you should try not to be tainted from the beginning. Also for that reason, it says that Aryas do not deliberately engage even in subtle bad actions or infractions, even for the sake of their lives. Okay, so Aryas are those who've got the direct realization of emptiness, and it's said that they are particularly careful to avoid bad actions and breaking vows and so forth, even at the cost of their life, right? So people sometimes wonder, well, okay, so I've taken the precept to not kill, but what if my life is threatened by somebody? Or, I meet a wild animal, a cougar or bear or tiger or whatever that's about to kill me. Should I really not kill that animal to save my life? It's hard to know. I wonder about that myself. If I was in that kind of situation, how would I react? It's kind of hard to know if you aren't in that situation. I would like to be willing to give up my life rather than commit the act of killing. That's what I would like to do, but it's kind of hard to know if I would have that much wisdom and compassion at that moment. But it said that Aryas would definitely, not commit some negative action, even to save their own life, because they know that this effect of negative actions, that it will delay their progress on the path. So better to give up your life than to do something negative. But then they are Aryas, so they're already at a pretty high level. And most probably, yeah, in their next, they're not going to be born in an unfortunate realm. So they don't have to worry about that when they lose their life. They'll have a fortunate rebirth and be able to continue following the path. But anyway, the point is, we should really try our best to not commit negative actions and not have that attitude, well, it's okay, I can do it, and then purify. If there were no difference between purifying them through confession and they're not arising from the beginning, there would be no need to act like that. So just using the Arya's behavior as kind of proof or evidence that, yeah, there is a difference between not doing the action and doing it and then purifying. In the mundane world too, if a wounded arm, leg, and so forth heals again, still it will not be the same as if it had never been wounded to begin with. So that's a helpful analogy. You could say, oh, well, never mind, I'll go skiing down this, treacherous mountain, and if I break my leg, never mind, I'll go to the hospital and they'll fix it up and I'll be okay again. But yeah, you can fix broken bones, but they're probably never going to be the same again. You'll probably continue having problems for the rest of your life. So it's best to try not to have such injuries in the first place. So in a similar way, it's best to try to avoid committing non-virtue and breaking vows in the beginning. And yeah, so this teaching that one way purification happens is that negative karma that would bring really heavy, terrible suffering can ripen in this lifetime as something relatively mild. So that's really, really helpful when it comes to our own life, our own experience. Because again, just the other day, there was an email from somebody who attended the Medicine Buddha Puja that we had on Sunday night. And this person said that during the Medicine Buddha Puja, at the point when we're visualizing, the light flowing down and purifying all your karma, he suddenly felt really sick and even wanted to leave, to quit the practice, but he stayed with it, and he still felt a little ill the next morning. And he mentioned his wife, who was somewhere else, and it sounded like she wasn't even doing the practice herself, but she also got really sick. So he thought this was really strange. And so, yeah, I sent him a passage from volume 2 about how, and it's similar here, when we do purification practice, then one effect is that we may experience some illness, some discomfort, some problem in this lifetime, and that's actually a good thing, because that means some karma that may have resulted in some really horrible suffering, even a bad rebirth, is ripening, is getting cleared out, and that means we don't have to experience that terrible suffering. So people who really believe in karma and the power of purification and so on would think that way. Would think, oh, this is great that I'm having this stomach ache or this, injury or whatever, because that means that bad karma is finished. My bad karma is finished. I don't have to experience some other terrible result. So it's good to know that, so that we don't get upset. Otherwise, you might get upset and think, I think some people do think this way. They think if I'm practicing the Dharma, everything should go well for me. I'm doing the right thing. Before I was really, mischievous and did all kinds of naughty things. So it was understandable that problems would happen to me. But now I'm being a good person. I'm behaving myself. I'm doing all these virtuous things. So everything should go well for me. I shouldn't have any problems. And then when a problem does happen, they can get really upset and even doubt that this practice is right. Maybe even blame the practice and think, oh, I started practicing Dharma and now I'm having all these problems. Maybe it's because of Dharma. Maybe I'm on the wrong path. I should give it up. So it's possible people would think that way. And so, we need to be careful and understand that this teaching is really, really helpful. And it is said that, once we start following the spiritual path and, really trying to work on ourselves, problems will happen. But this isn't a bad thing. This isn't a bad sign. It's actually a good sign. It means we're purifying, we're clearing out that karma. And the same thing could happen when we view other people. When, you see some other person who's, such a good person, they're doing so many good things for others, they're really pure and good-hearted and doing a lot of practice. And then we see all these problems happening to them. And again, it could cause us to have doubt in the efficacy of Dharma, right? I mean, I have to admit, when I, reading and hearing all the stories of the Tibetans, what happened to them after their country was taken over by communist China, and lamas and monks and nuns were put into prison, were executed, were tortured, were beaten. Horrible, horrible things happened. And I thought, how is this possible? They were so virtuous, they were so dedicated to Dharma, they were living in monasteries since they were little kids, spending all their time practicing and studying and memorizing, and this is happening to them. So it did make me kind of wonder. But, they themselves, when you hear them talk about their experiences, they say, well, this is the result of negative karma we created in past lives. And you don't just immediately get rid of all that karma once you start following the path. It takes quite a bit of time and energy to completely purify negative karma. So that's how they view it. They view the sufferings they experienced in that way, and that enabled them to not get angry, feel bitter, and still have compassion, patience and compassion for the ones doing these negative actions. So when we do purification practice, this is what we can expect. We can expect the reduction of the suffering that we would otherwise experience if we didn't do purification. And as far as completely eliminating the seeds of negative actions, such that they're totally gone, that's only possible with the direct realization of emptiness. So until we gain that realization, then the seeds may still be there, will probably still be there, but they may not be able to bring any result, or they bring a lighter result. But to completely eliminate the seeds, we need the realization of emptiness. And even then, they don't all get purified at once, but gradually over time, because it said that even arhats, those who've attained nirvana, free of all afflictions, but they can still have karmic seeds in their mind, and they can even ripen and bring about unpleasant experiences, like Moggallana getting beaten up. Angulimala got beaten up, stubbing their toe. So they can still have unpleasant experiences. But they don't have mental suffering. They don't suffer mentally when those things happen. Okay, any questions about any of that? Tenzin.
I ever heard before that group practices or group virtuous karma is difficulty. The merit itself is difficult to be destroyed by negative karma. So which one that it refers to from what text?
Which,
Group positive karma seeds.
so you're saying you heard that it's difficult for virtuous karma to be destroyed.
Which
So-
is created in a group.
Oh, group.
Yes.
Group karma. I haven't heard that. So you're saying virtuous collective karma. It's difficult to destroy it. I don't know. I don't remember hearing that. Does anyone else remember hearing that? No. There's not a lot of explanation about collective karma. And this book doesn't mention it at all, and other books that do mention it, it's just very brief. There's very little detailed explanation of group karma. So I haven't heard that. Sorry.
They do say that if you dedicate, you put the karma into the ocean. You don't put it in the ocean. Just like putting water into the ocean, it does not get destroyed as easily.
That is said about any karma,
Yeah.
our own individual karma. But there's different versions of that. One version is that if you dedicate with bodhicitta, you dedicate your virtue, your good karma, your merit to enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, then it doesn't get destroyed. But then other teachings say it actually has to be done with an understanding of emptiness. So you have to dedicate within at least some kind of understanding of emptiness. That's why Lama Zopa Rinpoche, whenever he was leading a dedication practice, he sort of talk about that, by this merit which is empty of existing from its own side, may I, who am empty of existing from its own side, reach enlightenment, which is empty. So just contemplating the emptiness of inherent existence of all the aspects of the merit and the dedication and so on. So that's said to be the most powerful way of preserving, protecting merit, good karma, virtue that we create so that it doesn't get destroyed.
Sometimes when we're leading the 35 Buddhas in the hall, I'm getting confused a little bit about some of the language that we use that we describe what we're purifying. So I want to clarify, when we're doing these, we're purifying the karmic seed, but can we actually purify the affliction?
Yeah, I know that those words are there.
Yeah, and it's tricky.
Yeah, destructive karma and obscurations. So it is often mentioned that afflictions and obscurations are also purified. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure. Again, to really purify, like completely get rid of afflictions so that they will never arise again, you need the direct realization of emptiness. But maybe it's for our benefit, to remember. We're not just purifying the actions that we've done, but we also need to purify what lies behind them. The afflictions that motivate those actions, those need to be purified as well. And so maybe it's just a helpful technique to remind us of that and not forget.
To mind maybe what we're doing more is the instances of afflictions. Because we can't, that's where I get confused. We can't do that this way. You can't purify those things by prostrating. You have to realize emptiness.
Yeah. It does help
instances,
because when we're, in the process of purification, we're doing a lot of virtuous things. We're generating virtuous states of mind, and we're visualizing the Buddhas, thinking about the Buddhas, reciting their names. So, doing a lot of virtue and doing things that are virtuous does counteract the afflictions. It does weaken them, but they can't be completely gone until we have the realization of emptiness.
My understanding, the complete action includes the afflictions, your motivation. So if you're purifying that action, wouldn't that kind of affect those, not totally uproot that particular affliction, but that action, that affliction that accompanied that action would have some kind of shaken a bit?
Yeah, except what comes to my mind is the affliction is already gone. The affliction that motivated that action is gone. It only lasted a few moments and then it's gone. It's no longer there. And of course, you have, later moments of that affliction, but the particular specific affliction that arose in your mind and motivated you to do that action, that's finished. The action is also finished. All that's left is that seed or imprint of the action. So, I don't know. Don't ask me. I just believe that it's good to do. It's a good thing to do. Venerable Sangye.
I'm wondering about the sentence on the top of 148. It says, for example, bodhisattva levels say that if a root downfall has occurred, it can be restored by taking the bodhisattva vow again, but it will be impossible to reach the first ground in this life. Now, I'm not in trouble with that one. I'm not even close. But I'm just thinking, that just passing away from a life, that action is still needing to be purified. So what's going on here? How do you understand this one?
So what is it you're asking? You're asking, so it's saying
can be
here that you
restored,
restore the vow if you
but you
broke.
can't reach the first ground in that life.
Mm-hmm.
But why does passing away and then coming into the next life make it possible to proceed?
I don't know. Yeah, I guess it just means that there's a delay in your attainment of the first ground, such that while you're still in that body, that set of aggregates, it won't be possible. But how and why, I don't know. I can't explain that. I think the point he's trying to make here is try not to create those negativities in the first place if you can avoid it.
Venerable, if let's say we take like the Bodhisattva vow and then we say, oh, we want to have an imprint or we want to create the causes, and then we just take this Bodhisattva vow, it seems like that's not very advisable because if not, you will delay your attainments.
Yeah, in the scriptures, they do, and even in the Lamrim books, they say that they talk about taking bodhisattva vows after you have already generated uncontrived bodhicitta, and not just wishing bodhicitta, but engaging bodhicitta. It's at that point that you take bodhisattva vows. Well, reality is most of us take bodhisattva vows long before we're at that point. And the lamas usually say, oh, it's okay, if you have the aspiration to follow the bodhisattva vow, the bodhisattva path, it's good to take those vows. So your question is, so is that a good thing to do, given that maybe you'll break? Yeah, but then how likely is it that you would achieve the first ground in this lifetime anyway? That means you have to be a bodhisattva, uncontrived bodhicitta, a realization of emptiness, calm abiding, union of calm abiding and realization of emptiness, and then the direct realization of emptiness. I mean, that's a lot of things to do. And it's not so likely, unless you're already quite far advanced from your past lives, not that likely. So I guess I just trust the lamas. I mean, they seem to, like even the Dalai Lama, tens of thousands of people present, and he gives them bodhisattva vows, although he does give them the option of taking just the, the wishing level of bodhicitta rather than the engaging level. But I don't know, I feel like from their point of view, just making that contact with the whole idea of bodhicitta and taking vows, bodhisattva vows, is so powerful, so positive. It's so good to do. I mean, I'm sure they can see that we're really not capable of keeping them perfectly without breaking them, but it's just getting us started on the path. And yeah. But that's something you could also check with your teacher. If you have a teacher, you could ask them, do you think I'm ready to take these vows?
It seems like until we have a direct, spontaneous, uncontrived bodhicitta, that our bodhisattva vows are similitude of that, of the actual vows.
Our what?
Are similitude of them. And I think I've actually heard that said.
Yeah, I've heard that as well from some lamas, that, yeah, if you don't yet have uncontrived bodhicitta, you take the vows, what you get is really just a similitude of the vows and not the actual vows. So some lamas say that, some don't. So I don't know, I'm not in a position to say, but it does kind of make sense. If the vows are intended for those who really are bodhisattvas, have uncontrived bodhicitta, then if you're not yet at that point, you're not yet that kind of person, then maybe the vows don't really arise in your mind. But I think it's still good to take them seriously and to really try your best.
Yeah, I think we need to keep them as well as we can, but I don't know if it's the same effect if we break them as if we were holding the actual vows. That was my thought.
Yeah, could be. Okay, so sorry I don't know all the answers to all these questions. Karma is very complex, but that brings us to the end of that section on karma. And then the next section below the middle of page 148 says the measure of that attitude having arisen. And that attitude refers to the attitude of the person of lesser capacity or initial capacity, small scope. And so that outline heading actually goes back to page 79, when we just started this section, the stages shared with persons of lesser capacity. So up until now, it's been talking about that level of the path and how to develop that. Venerable Sangye gave a very nice BBC the other day where she summarized the main meditations that you do. Precious human life, impermanence, death, sufferings of unfortunate rebirths, refuge, karma. So those are the main meditations you do to generate this attitude of the person of, here it's called lesser capacity. I think Venerable uses the term initial capacity. So this little paragraph talks about how do you know if you do have that attitude, the person of lesser capacity. So he says, previously you had an uncontrived interest in this life only, and your interest in future lives was just a vague understanding elicited by the words of others. Does that sound true? So before learning the Dharma, before learning, the Lamrim and starting to do these reflections, then he's saying we had this uncontrived, spontaneous, natural, effortless interest in just this lifetime, and little or no interest in future lives. I think, and for many people, there's zero interest in future lives because they don't even believe in future lives, right? They only believe in this life, and when we die, that's it. We go out of existence. So that's all there is this life. So then they would have zero interest in future lives. And then he says, once their ranking has been switched so that future lives have become the main interest, and this life nothing but a byproduct, the attitude of persons of lesser capacity has developed. Okay, so that's what we're aiming for in doing these meditations, is to get to the point where next life, future lives are our number one concern, our priority, and this life becomes, well, he says, nothing but a byproduct, not concerned at all, or very, very little concern, or, just taking care of this life to the extent that you need to keep, that you can continue practicing the Dharma. Yeah, so in the stories like Lama Tsongkhapa and Milarepa and these great meditators, and even nowadays many practitioners, serious practitioners, they have almost zero interest in comfort and nice food, and they just take care of their body, their life, to the extent that they can remain alive and continue practicing and working for higher goals like nirvana, liberation, enlightenment. But here, on the level of lesser capacity, we're just thinking about future lives, making sure that we don't go to an unfortunate rebirth as an animal, a hungry ghost, or in hell, and that we have a fortunate rebirth. Because even if our goal is enlightenment or nirvana, that's going to take a number of lifetimes. Very, very rare for anyone to achieve those goals in one life. So we need to ensure that we have some lifetimes where we can continue to practice Dharma. We need the right conditions so we can continue to follow the path. As this nevertheless needs to be stabilized, you should strive to train in it even after it has arisen. So even if you do get that experience of future lives being your number one priority, you need to maintain that, not lose it, not let it slip. So continue doing the meditations, the reflections. And then clearing up misconceptions about that. The scriptures say that one must turn the mind away from all the advantages of cyclic existence. This has been the basis of some confusion. Some people may think it is improper to strive for a higher rebirth with an excellent body, wealth, and so forth, because those are part of cyclic existence. Right? That's reasonable. Yeah? Some people may think, well, we shouldn't aspire for anything in samsara, even fortunate rebirths, because it's just samsara, it's just suffering. We should only strive for liberation, enlightenment. So he explains, in terms of what one should strive for, there are both temporary and ultimate goals. Even those who strive for liberation need to temporarily strive for the good things within cyclic existence, such as an excellent body and so forth, since definite goodness is ultimately attained on the basis of a continuous succession of such lives. So what I've learned is the minimum amount of time it takes to attain nirvana, if you're following the hearer's path, is 3 lifetimes. So, but for some it would be more than that. Depends on how well you practice. So you got at least 3 lifetimes to go, and you got to make sure that you have a human life or God life, a life in which you can continue practicing Dharma, following the path. And then for full enlightenment, Buddhahood, it takes even longer. Okay, so we really have to make sure we have fortunate rebirths. And then he says, not everything that is an excellent body, wealth, and retinue of a higher state is included in cyclic existence, because the culmination of an excellent body and so forth is the form body of a Buddha, the wealth of his field and his retinue. So he's saying that, it's not right to think that excellent body just on its own is necessarily samsara, because a Buddha has an excellent body. The form body, the rupakaya of a Buddha is an excellent body. And then likewise, wealth. A Buddha has wealth in the sense of being in a pure land with beautiful surroundings and so on and so forth. And then retinue, surrounded by bodhisattvas and so on. So just excellent body, wealth, and retinue are not in themselves samsaric and things to be avoided, things to be rejected. And then he says, it is with this intention that ornament for the Mahayana Sutras says the first 4 perfections accomplish the excellent body, excellent wealth, excellent retinue, and excellent undertakings of a higher state. Many scriptures explain that they accomplish the form body. So Geshe Zopa kind of clarifies this. He says, what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here is that it's incorrect to think that things like an excellent body, resources, retinue, and so on are exclusively samsaric and we should completely turn away from them, because a Buddha has these in their most pure and perfected forms. They are attributes of a Buddha's form body. And the causes for attaining those qualities of a Buddha are the first 4 perfections. And specifically, he says giving, practicing giving, the first perfection, leads to the unlimited resources of a Buddha field. And the practice of ethics, perfection of ethics, leads to the perfect body of a Buddha. And the perfection of patience leads to the perfect retinue of a Buddha. And then joyous effort leads to the perfect activity of a Buddha. And so, a bodhisattva does need to be concerned about creating the causes for those results of perfect body and so on and so forth. And then he said the last 2 perfections, perfection of concentration and wisdom, lead to the Dharmakaya, the omniscient mind of the Buddha and the complete cessation of all obscurations. Therefore, these qualities are very beneficial, both in a temporary sense. We need to have those qualities in our future lives to continue on the path, and also in an ultimate sense, because those are attributes of the enlightened state that we are aiming for. Does that make sense? And there's something else in Geshe Sopa's commentary, which is, again, his commentary is on the Lamrim Chenmo, the greater version of this book. And in the Lamrim Chenmo, That's something Lama Tsongkhapa talks about right at the end of this section, and Geshe Zopa explains it. He said, to obtain such a fully qualified body, like an excellent body in future lives with all the ideal conditions to continue practicing, it will not be sufficient to take and keep the precepts of the novice monk or nun, which are themselves incomplete. You must enter into and observe faithfully the bhikshu vow, the pratimoksha vows of the fully ordained monk or nun. And he says, yes, you can also take bodhisattva vows and tantric vows, and those are very beneficial. But to obtain all the qualities you need, you must at least observe the complete pratimoksha vows and make those precepts the foundation of your training. And Lama Tsongkhapa mentions some objections to this idea. So they must have existed in his day and age. Objections that, no, it's enough to keep lower sets of the pratimoksha vows, like the 5 lay vows, the 1-day vows, and so forth. That's enough to be able to have a good rebirth. And those are easier to keep than the vows of full ordination. But Lama Tsongkhapa dismisses such arguments as senseless babble of people who have no insight whatever into the key points of the Buddhist teachings. And he says the different levels of the pratimoksha vows are like stepping stones, with each lower set leading to the next higher set, culminating in the full ordination of monks and nuns. So the lower sets of the vows, like the 1-day vow, 5 precepts, and so on, are not the complete fulfillment of the vows of individual liberation. They are stages one passes through on the way to that completion, which is full ordination. So this made me wonder if those Tibetans who say that full ordination for nuns isn't necessary, if they have read this passage, Tsongkhapa, they might say, oh yes, yeah, but it doesn't exist. It does, we don't have it. So, keeping the novice vows is good enough. Maybe that would be their argument for that. I don't know. Well, I was reading, so in the Lamrim Chenmo, Lama Tsongkhapa mentions these things, and then Geshe Zopa was elaborating. So I was mainly reading Geshe Zopa's commentary to Lama Tsongkhapa, because in fact, Geshe Zopa mentions none, whereas Lama Tsongkhapa didn't. He just mentioned the bhikshu vows, the vows of a fully ordained monk, because they didn't exist in Tibet. But Geshe Zopa is more, maybe, yeah, more diplomatic. He probably had women and nuns in his audience, so he mentioned, yeah. But he's acknowledging the existence of, well, there have been nuns going, like Venerable Hangqing. She was a fully ordained nun who studied at the University of Wisconsin. So he must have had contact with bhikshunis, even when he was giving these teachings. So yeah, that's like a good, strong argument for the restoration of the full ordination for nuns. Okay, so this concludes the explanation of training the mind in the stages of the path shared in common with persons of lesser capacity. Are you ready to move on? Okay, so next is the stages shared with persons of medium capacity, and I made outlines on for those who may not have the text. Okay. This section is actually fairly short. Now we get to the great vehicle, bodhisattvas. Okay, so we're on this is chapter 11, page 153. The chapter title is Suffering. Okay. Okay, so training the mind in the stages of the path shared in common with persons of medium capacity. Thus, having recollected death and contemplated how you fall into the lower rebirths after death, you turn your mind away from this world and strive for fortunate rebirths. Then you give up bad actions through the common refuge practice and through ascertaining virtuous and non-virtuous actions and their effects. By then putting effort into accomplishing virtue, you will indeed attain the state of the fortunate rebirths. However, that is not considered sufficient here. Rather, after you develop the attitude common to persons of lesser capacity, you develop the attitude common to persons of medium capacity, which counteracts adherence to cyclic existence as a whole. Based on that, you will develop bodhicitta and be led onto the path of persons of great capacity. Therefore, train in the attitude common to persons of medium capacity. Even though you attain the state of a god or a human in this manner, you do not pass beyond compositional suffering. Therefore, it is a mistake to consider that state to be naturally happy, since in reality it is devoid of happiness, and in the end it is bad because you will certainly fall into the lower rebirths again. So having looked at all the different meditations involved in the first level of the path, common with persons of lesser capacity, there we mainly develop the concern for future lives and do what we need to do in order to ensure that we'll have fortunate circumstances in future lives and don't end up going to unfortunate realms. And so that's the aim, having rebirth as a human or as a god. But as he says here, but even if you do obtain such rebirths, there's still suffering. You're not free of suffering. You're not free of dukkha. And he mentions specifically compositional suffering. That's probably the third of the three types of sufferings. Sometimes it's called pervasive compounded suffering. There's different ways of translating it. But anyway, that's just the situation of being under the control of karma and afflictions, being bound by karma and afflictions, not free from karma and afflictions. So it's karma and afflictions that keep throwing us back into samsara again and again and again. Every time we end one life, we are thrown immediately into another life in samsara. So we're kind of trapped, stuck in samsara. And so even in a good rebirth, you have some pleasure, but it's not real pleasure, not genuine, long-term, lasting pleasure, and you're still, experiencing pervasive, compounded suffering. And there's always the possibility of going back to the lower rebirths, And as long as we're in samsara, even if you're in the highest God realms, long life, bliss, no suffering, but those come to an end eventually, and there's always a possibility of a lower rebirth because there's still karma in the mind. Karma hasn't been completely purified. That's kind of basic idea behind this level of the path. Okay, so then there's outlines how to develop the mind striving for liberation. Training the mind in the stages of the path shared in common with persons of medium capacity has 4 points, which are up here. the actual training in the attitude, the measure of its development, eliminating misconceptions, and determining the nature of the path leading to liberation. So first, the actual training in the attitude has 2 points. So you can go to the next slide. So training in the attitude has 2 points. A is identifying the mind striving for liberation and the methods for generating it. Okay, so first, identifying the mind striving for liberation. This is the attitude we need to cultivate in ourselves. So liberation is freedom from bondage. And bondage here doesn't mean just having your hands tied together or being a slave. I mean, those are bad situations, but bondage here means something else. Karma and the afflictions bind one in cyclic existence. Through the power of these two, the aggregates are reborn in one of the 3 realms, such as the desire realm, as one of the 5 or 6 types of beings, such as gods, and in one of the 4 birthplaces, such as a womb. So the Buddhist scriptures talk about these different situations of rebirth. One is in 3 realms, the desire realm, where we are, the form realm, which is, very blissful, but still samsara, the formless realm, where you don't even have a physical body, you only have a mind abiding continuously in a state of meditative absorption, very peaceful, no problems at all for a really long time. But all of these situations are still within samsara, still within cyclic existence, and one is still bound by karma and afflictions, not free from karma and afflictions. And then he mentions 5 or 6 types of beings, such as gods. So we normally talk about 6 realms of existence, which are the 3 lower realms: hell, hungry ghost, animal, and then 3 upper realms: human, demigod, and God. But when some texts just mention 5, so the 5 combine the demigods and the gods. They don't have a separate realm for the demigods or the asuras. There's different ways of enumerating the different realms. And then 4 birthplaces, such as a womb. So, Buddhism says there's 4 ways that we can be reborn. Like in our case, we're born from a womb. Another possibility is egg, born from an egg, like chickens and turtles and what else? Snakes? Are they born from eggs? And then, anyway, we know eggs. And then there's spontaneous birth, where you just suddenly appear. That's the kind of birth that happens in hell. You don't have mothers in hell. You're just suddenly there, experiencing suffering. And also some of the God realms as well. And it's just spontaneous birth without the need to come through a mother. And then they also talk about birth from heat and moisture. And they give examples like, I don't know, we would say, oh, there's teeny weeny little eggs in there. But, you just see insects coming out spontaneously when there's certain conditions. Yeah? So they say that's birth from heat and moisture. So those are the 4 types of birth, or places of birth. So this is the meaning of bondage. Therefore, freedom from this is liberation. The wish to attain that is the mind striving for liberation. So bondage means you're being a sentient being who is not free from karma and afflictions. one still has afflictions such as ignorance, greed, hatred, and so forth in one's mind. Those arise without choice, without control. They motivate us to create actions, both non-virtuous actions as well as virtuous actions. So even our virtuous actions are involved with afflictions. And so even the virtuous actions that we do become the cause for being born again in samsara. And so this all happens without choice or control through the process of the 12 links. I don't think in this book he goes into the 12 links, but we've had very extensive teaching on the 12 links. Volume 3, and also with Geshe Yeshitapke's teachings in the Rice Seedling Sutra. But yeah, so that's the meaning of bondage, being bound, being tied, being trapped, being unfree of cyclic existence, being stuck in cyclic existence, having no choice, no control, even where we get reborn. So as we go through the text, we look at more details of cyclic existence, the different kinds of sufferings or dukkha, so that we generate the strong determination to become free, to attain liberation from that. And even though our ultimate goal is enlightenment, following the Bodhisattva's path, reaching enlightenment, we still have to generate this state of mind. Because if we don't even wish for ourselves to be free from samsara, how can we generate the wish for all other sentient beings to be free of samsara? Some people might think, oh, we can skip over this part because we're not interested in nirvana liberation. So we'll just go straight to the great vehicle, the Bodhisattva's path. But you can't do that. It doesn't work. You can't generate bodhicitta, because bodhicitta involves understanding the suffering of all sentient beings in samsara and feeling strong compassion and determination to free them from all those sufferings and causes of suffering. So you have to understand samsara very, very well and really be totally disillusioned, disenchanted with samsara, see very clearly all the sufferings, all the unsatisfactoriness of samsara. And yeah, just strong determination that I have to be free from this, and then extend that to everybody else. I have to get everyone else out as well. So even though this, this particular section of the Lamrim is kind of unpleasant in a way, meditating on all the different types of sufferings, it's not at all pleasant, but it's really important. To have strong bodhicitta, we need to have strong renunciation, determination to be free. And that comes from seeing clearly this situation of samsara. Okay, so we'll stop there for today. We at least got started finally on this section, and we'll continue next week. Any last questions before we finish? Okay.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and those spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lobsang's teachings dispelling the darkness the beings in the three worlds always increase. Idam Guru Rana Mandalakam Niryatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Just like to mention, if anyone's going to